silence in the chamber of geometry was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating kind that usually precedes a frantic attempt to read a user manual, or in this specific case, an accidental interstellar incident. Sergeant Leo Vance stood with a grease-stained rag in one hand and a half-eaten protein bar wrapper in his pocket, looking terribly pleased with himself. Opposite him, High Priestess Eliana was undergoing a biological reaction that humans might call blushing, provided blushing involved one's pale alabaster skin suddenly erupting in glowing violet fractals that swirled across her cheeks and down her neck like spilled ink. The Council of Elders, 12 tall beings draped in robes of absolute symmetry, were currently face down on the polished floor, prostrating themselves before Leo's scuffed work boots. Leo blinked, shifted his weight, and whispered out of the side of his mouth, "Did I break it?" Eliana stared at him, her large dark eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of horror and awe. The violet patterns on her skin pulsed faster, a frantic semaphore of emotional overload. She opened her mouth, but the only sound that came out was a tiny, strangled squeak. It is funny, really, how the universe balances itself. 3 hours ago, there was no panic, no glowing skin, and certainly no booing. There was just a very tired human and a very stressed alien staring at a machine that was humming in the wrong key. When Leo had first arrived at the spire of Othris, he had felt distinctly like a muddy footprint on a wedding dress. The station was a marvel of obsessive compulsion. Every hallway was a perfect circle, and every light fixture aligned to the millimeter, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and expensive geometry. It was a place where dust was not just cleaned, it was excommunicated. Eliana had met him at the airlock, wringing her long, slender hands. She was beautiful in the way a math equation is beautiful. Elegant, precise, and completely terrifying if you didn't know what you were looking at. "Thank you for coming, Sergeant," she had said, her voice tight. "The spiritual turbulence is becoming unmanageable." Leo had adjusted his tool belt, which squeaked offensively in the hushed corridor. "Turbulence? You mean the vibration in the stabilizer?" Eliana flinched as if he had said a curse word. "The harmony is misaligned by 0.001%. It is a heresy of the highest order. If the geometry is not perfect, another sanctity of the spire fails. We have chanted, we have burned the incense of calibration. The machine does not listen." Leo nodded slowly, trying to look sympathetic rather than amused. Humans are chaos engines wrapped in skin. To them, a 0.001% variance is just a Tuesday. But he could see the genuine distress in her posture, the way her shoulders were drawn up tight near her ears. She looked like she was vibrating apart alongside her beloved machine. "Show me the patient," Leo said gently. The gravity drive sat in the center of the room, a monolith of silver and white light. And sure enough, if you leaned in close and held your breath, you could hear it. A faint, rhythmic rattle. Tock, tock, tock. To Leo, it sounded like a loose heat shield on a transport rover. To Eliana, it sounded like the voice of a dying god. Leo walked around the machine, disregarding the designated prayer mats, and leaned his ear against the warm metal casing. He tapped it with a knuckle. "Right," he muttered. He didn't open his holographic diagnostic suite. He didn't begin the 3-hour chant of alignment. Instead, he dug into his pocket and pulled out the wrapper from his lunch. A thick, sturdy piece of cardboard that had once held a chocolate ration. Eliana watched him, her breath hitched in her throat. "Sergeant, what are you doing?" Leo didn't answer immediately. He was busy folding the cardboard. Once, twice, thrice. A perfect, dense little wedge. He crouched down near the base of the massive, holy machine, finding the mounting bracket that had worked itself loose over the centuries. There was a gap there, no wider than a fingernail. Where the metal was vibrating against the floor, He jammed the folded cardboard into the gap. He gave it a firm shove with his thumb, wiggling it until it sat flush. The rattling stopped instantly. The hum returned to a pure, unbroken note. Leo stood up, wiped his hands on his rag, and offered her a crooked, tired grin. "Fixed," he announced, tapping the casing. "That little shim will hold until the heat death of the universe, or until it gets wet. Try not to get it wet." He looked at her, expecting relief. Maybe a thank you. Instead, he watched as the first bloom of violet light exploded across her collarbone, a silent firework of absolute shock. Eliana placed a trembling hand on his arm, her skin burning hot even through his uniform sleeve. The violet light pulsing beneath her dermis was bright enough to read by, swirling in hypnotic, frantic loops. "Please," she whispered, the word barely escaping her throat. "Do not remove the shim." Leo froze, his hand hovering inches from the machine. He looked down at the prostrate elders, then back at the terrified High Priestess, and finally at the piece of folded garbage currently holding the spiritual integrity of the station together. "Why?" he whispered back, matching her volume. "It's just a wrapper. I can go get a real bolt." Eliana closed her eyes, a look of profound, beautiful misery crossing her face. "To you it is refuse," she hissed softly. "To my people, you have just performed the rite of the eternal anchor. You saw a flaw in our perfection, and instead of rejecting us, you filled the void with a piece of your own journey. You silenced the chaos with your own hands." She opened her eyes and the violet light deepened, shifting from panic to a rich, embarrassing indigo. It is the archaic gesture of a consort declaring protection over his queen. "You have effectively told the council that you will bear the weight of my world, so I do not have to." Leo blinked. He looked at the council again. One of them was weeping joyfully into the floor tiles. "Oh," Leo said, "that seems significant." "It is irrevocable," Eliana murmured. "If you remove it now, you are not just fixing a machine. You are divorcing the station. The spiritual shock would likely cause the elders to faint." Leo slowly lowered his hand. He looked at Eliana, really looked at her, for the first time. Beneath the terrifying symmetry of her robes and the alien bioluminescence, she looked exhausted. He recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had spent her entire life trying to be a perfect shape in a universe that kept trying to bend her. "So," Leo said, scratching the back of his neck, "I guess we're married then." "Until the Festival of Alignment concludes in 3 days," Eliana pleaded, her fingers tightening on his arm. "Just stand next to me. Look capable. Do not tell them it held chocolate." The next 72 hours were a blur of incense, geometric hymns, and Leo standing very still while trying not to sneeze. He was paraded through the spire as the Lord of the Anchor, a title he felt he hadn't quite earned given his qualifications were mostly in percussion maintenance. But in the quiet moments between ceremonies, when the procession paused and the crowds looked away, something shifted, and they stood on a balcony overlooking the station's core. Eliana let out a long, shuddering breath, the violet patterns on her skin fading to a soft, pulsing lavender. She leaned against the railing, her posture slumping in a way that would have scandalized the council. "I am terrified," she admitted to the dark. "The vibration, it was my failure. The geometry demands absolute precision. If I cannot maintain it, I am nothing." Leo leaned next to her, resting his elbows on the rail. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't recite scripture. "You know," he said conversationally, "back home, we build things with sway. Skyscrapers, bridges. If you build them too rigid, they snap in the wind. You have to leave room for the wobble." Eliana turned to look at him, her large eyes reflecting the station lights. "Room for the wobble?" she repeated, testing the strange, clumsy human words. Yeah, Leo smiled, and it was the soft, easy grin that usually preceded him doing something reckless. Perfection is brittle, Your Highness. A little bit of cardboard keeps the whole thing from shaking apart. Maybe you don't have to carry the whole frequency by yourself. Eliana stared at him. For years, she had been taught that chaos was the enemy, a force to be calculated out of existence. But here was this human, a creature made of bad jokes and messy solutions, and he felt steady. He felt like an anchor. The violet light on her cheeks didn't flare up in panic this time. Instead, it softened, glowing with a steady, warm rhythm that matched the beat of a heart. She reached out, her cool fingers brushing against his rough, grease-stained hand. The wrapper, she said softly. It is not structural. Leo laughed, a low, warm sound. Technically, no, it's temporary. But it works. Ileana looked down at where their hands almost touched. The perfectly ordered world of the spire hummed around them, but for the first time, she wasn't listening for the flaws. Let it stay, she decided, and her voice was no longer the voice of a high priestess, but just a woman making a choice. The permanent fix can wait. I find I am growing fond of the wobble. Leo turned his hand over, catching her fingers in his. Copy that, he said softly. And somewhere in the machine room, a piece of folded cardboard held the line against the infinite, doing the most important job in the galaxy simply by being there. Yanaliana suffers from the spotlight effect, the psychological bias where we believe everyone is watching our every move and judging our minor mistakes as catastrophic failures. To her, the 0.001% vibration wasn't a noise. It was a billboard announcing her incompetence to the galaxy. Leo disrupts this by normalizing imperfection, by treating the catastrophe as a mundane annoyance, like a loose muffler. He pops the bubble of her anxiety. He proves that the universe and the council won't end just because things aren't perfect. He gives her permission to be good enough. Words shape our reality. Eliana was trapped in a framework of spiritual purity, where a mechanical fault equals a moral sin. Heresy. This triggers high-stakes fight-or-flight responses. Leo uses cognitive reframing, and he relabels the spiritual crisis as a mechanical quirk. The wobble, by changing the vocabulary from sacred to structural, he lowers the emotional stakes. He teaches her that a problem can just be a problem, not a judgment on her soul. We are often sold the idea that romance is about grand, poetic gestures. However, long-term relationship psychology points to instrumental support, tangible, practical help, as a key predictor of trust. Leo doesn't recite poetry or bring flowers. He fixes the scary noise with a piece of trash. This is the pragmatics of intimacy. To Aliana, who is drowning in performance and ritual, the most romantic thing in the universe isn't a sonnet. It's a partner who is willing to get their hands dirty to make her world stable. The cardboard shim isn't garbage. It's proof of safety.